even digital tools. In your view, what are the biggest challenges that African countries face in building reliable and people-centered energy and infrastructure systems?
Thank you very much for that question. And I love the way that the question has been phrased, because you do recognize that energy is the backbone of the society. So when you talk about energy, we're talking about what gives us transport, what gives us food, what gives us heating, cooling, the lights, telecommunications. And so it is a $1 trillion industry that has got a huge impact on the economy. And you might know that energy access is directly correlated to gross domestic product, GDP, and directly positively correlated also to Human Development Index. What that means is that the more you have access to energy, the more likely you are to be economically efficient. The more you can start a business, you can have a butchery, you can have whatever kind of business, and the better quality of life that you have. And so the fact that today in Africa, over 50% of the population doesn't have access to electricity is worrying, and it's scary. And close to 98% are in the sub-Saharan part of Africa. And so what I would say as one of the major challenges, especially in the context of history and colonialism, is the fact that is the legacy of an extractive infrastructure. So when the colonizers were here, whether they built a road or a power station, or they built some kind of infrastructure, it was not to benefit the indigenous people. It was to easily extract minerals at a low cost, using low labor, in order for them to be processed for the benefit of the West. And so coming down today to the present, the problem is even worse, because not only are we a source of cheap minerals and low-cost labor, we have also become a market. So what I mean is that if copper, which is mined in Zambia, is taken in its raw form, very cheap, taken to China or to another country, it is processed to become cables, copper wires. It is sold back to us at a very expensive price. Same thing with lithium that is mined in the Congo, taken outside, made as lithium batteries, and sold back to us as electric vehicles. You see that there's an unfairness there. And so we have perpetuated this system of extraction, and we have not yet reached the point where we begin to add value addition on our own minerals. That way we generate value that's able to give us the financial capacity to invest in our quality of life. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Ngosa. And just in a few words, how do you think that this problem can be tackled? Where do you see the greatest potential for change?
Okay, so again, it is a big question, but to be brief, I would say that the biggest potential for change is, of course, in the political will, as well as the will of us as the young people. So when I say political will, not only leaders, but also us as young people, in asking ourselves, do we really want this kind of solution? There are many things that can be done on the technical level. Let's say the introduction of mini grids, the introduction of the privatization, not full privatization, but inviting private companies to participate in the generation of energy, for example, because that makes the sector more efficient. But aside from all these other things, I think that the major thing, as well as what the professor mentioned too, is that there has to be a change in the mindset. Each one of us needs to know that the West our development is not the primary interest of the West. Whether they give you aid or they give you investments, it's not because they want the best for you. It's because that is in the best interest of them. And we have to have a similar mentality to say whatsoever we do must be in the best interest for us as a people. And so if you're a student, whatever field that you're doing, engineering, medical, biotechnology, local development, you have to recognize that you are able to do a change because you've got the exposure, you've got the education, you've got this lived experience that allows you to have an upper hand in influencing the people that are there back home. And we have to do it for ourselves because wherever we want to go, it's our feet that must take us there. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ngosa. And Chris, when we think about technology and innovation on a global scale, where do you think Africa stands today?
Oh, okay. Thank you. Actually, I think a lot of people assume that Africa currently is a backward place, and we are waiting for Western enlightenment. But that's one notion I'm trying to correct today, because when it comes to tech, we are actually contributing to the global discourse. So let's take AI for example. There are a lot of the big AI companies, for example, are overlooking traditional African languages, but local talents, indigenous talents from across Africa have risen up to the occasion and developed indigenous AI models for text to speech for local African languages. So basically, we have our own 11 labs. And then when it comes to bigger models, also like ChatGPT, I mean, basically, for an AI model, to train an AI model, you need data. And no matter how fancy your your mathematics and architecture is, you need quality labeled data and annotated. And then for ChatGPT and several of these big models, the data they use were trained in Africa, in places like Kenya, Ghana, and South Africa. Uh, Apart from that, we have a lot of tech unicorns these days. A tech unicorn is a startup that is valued at over $1 billion. So Flutterwave, for example, a fintech startup in Africa, was recently valued at about $5 billion, and they developed local payment systems to process transactions across the continent. And another example is Andela, for example. Andela trains local talents and connects them to global companies. And there are several global companies that are actually sourcing for talents right now in Africa. And Andela recently was valued at over $3 billion. So these are just some of the examples. There are a lot of young guys across Africa who are contributing to open source projects. So we do have a lot of people doing things. I think when it also comes to drones and hard techs, we have a lot of people doing amazing things. Recently, we had a drone company from Nigeria that raised a lot of money. I think currently the only issue we have is regarding money and education. I think currently we still have issues with talent, because I think the education system currently is antiquated. It's basically outdated, because they are still teaching things from the colonial era. And for example, in Nigeria, the government allocates 7% of the budget for education, which is below what UNESCO recommends at about 20%. So another issue besides education and human capital would be money, because to run a startup and to grow a startup, you need a lot of money. So we need investors. These are the challenges that we currently face regarding that. But when it comes to the talent, I think we do have talent. I think we are contributing to the global discourse.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Chris. And thank you both for sharing your insights and your thoughts with us. Thank you so much. And now we're going to move on to the next section. So could you give them a round of applause? Okay, so we're moving on to the next section, which talks about Africa's history, pre and post colonialism. And for that, I would like to invite Mr. Patrick Fonku, who will serve as the moderator for this section.
Thank you, Chloe. Thank you to everyone. So now we're going to go into the pre-colonial part and post-colonialism. I think everybody, while sitting down, there was a piece of paper on your chair. Not so?
That's all.
Yeah, just take that piece of paper, please. On that piece of paper you have, it's to say thank you for coming, but under you have 3 names. Each person has 3 different names. The 3 different names are for the 3 different eras: the pre-colonial, the colonial, and the people who are shaping Africa now. Thank you. So while we'll be talking, you can have time, you Google it. While you go home, you Google those names. and you will see the incredible story about Africa. So now I will have a seat. Thanks. I will invite three panelists who are going to come and talk about the pre-colonial part, the history of Africa, and how it is impacting on globalization. These panelists are from different regions of Africa, from the northern part to the west to the central. So I'll try and call them. We have our friend Matthew, who is an African scholar, a historian. He's from Nigeria. We have Emric Tanye, who has a lot to say about Africa struggles. And we have lastly our beautiful guest, Iman from Morocco, who's a political scientist, a communication specialist. And you see, I will just go deep into it. We are short of time. So today, we are going to talk about pre-colonial era. So I'll start with Matthew. Matthew, you've done a lot of work. You've done a lot of work in Africa. You studied a lot Africa. You know the past, before colonization. And in one of your studies, you said, we got, let me think again about it. You said we got these trade routes in the past. We were trading amongst Africa and even out of Africa without being known. So do you think that idea challenges that globalization started with Europe?
Thank you very much for having me today. My name is Matthew Anuforo. I'm from Nigeria. Definitely, there is the conception that globalization is an entirely Western idea, which from archives, from studies of African scholars, this is not true. Because if you look at the map of Africa, for instance, it's not some bare land. There have been trade routes connecting the sub-Saharan Africa with the north. There have been trade exchanges in the Swahili coast. You see, so Africa has always engaged with trading, even with China, right from the time of the Genghis, and so there have always been an exchange. Because when you think globalization or civilization, people immediately think of the Renaissance, the French or the Italian Renaissance. So in reality, we also have our history. And because, they often say that history is often written by the victors, which is why most of us, even from back home, our secondary school or our high school, we've all been exposed to the idea that globalization is an entirely Western idea, but this is not true because history is there. We have Mansa Musa of Mali, of the Malian Empire. We had the Kanem Bornu Empire. We had trade in gold, in salt through the Saharan desert, and then we had trade also, like I mentioned earlier, in the Swahili coast. So the entire idea that globalization is a Western concept is totally flawed. It is very Eurocentric, and it robs Africa of having a history, which has always been the dominant narrative in European intellectual discourse.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. It was very, very insightful. So I'll go to Emric. Emric, we heard Matthew talk about the Malian Empire, the Kanem Borno empires. So I would like you to tell us a little bit more truth about the Malian Empire, about these empires which shaped Africa in those times. When we talk about the Malian Empire, we know Sundiata Keita, we know the Mosque of Timbuktu, and all those things. So if you could tell us a little bit some truth about that, then we'll be very glad. But I'll say that Emric will speak either in French or in Italian because those are his two languages. So which language would you like him to speak? French, so that I translate. Okay, go on in French.
Ok, merci déjà pour la parole. Et j'aimerais commencer par une citation de Kate Anta Diop qui dit la culture est la mémoire du peuple. Pour me référer à ce que le professeur a dit dès le début, je te laisse traduire s'il te plaît.
So he said, culture is the memory of the people.
Exactement.
Which is a citation from Sheikh Anta Diop.
Exactement. Et pour me référer à ce que le professeur a dit dès le début, quand il parlait, j'ai retrouvé certains de ces points-là dans ce qui se passe dans le passé et ce qui aurait dû être fait entre le passé et le futur. Parce qu'il faut comprendre qu'il y a un lien entre le passé et le futur. Parce qu'en parlant, on se dit l'Afrique n'avait pas d'histoire, l'Afrique n'avait pas un pas vers le développement en fait. Et si on regarde dans ce sens-là, on perd complètement le nord parce qu'on se dit il faut qu'on s'invente. On ne doit pas s'inventer, on doit juste continuer ce qui a déjà été fait en fait.
Okay, so he's saying, as culture is memory for the people, we need to know that we had history before. Knowing that we should know where we're heading to. And to know where we're heading to, we need to know what was before. We now have the concept of reinventing things which had already been done by our ancestors in the past. So what Emmerich is trying to say is that we shouldn't go forward without knowing our own proper story.
Exactement. Et parlant principalement du royaume Congo, ou l'empire manding en fait, ce royaume est un royaume qui a été créé par un Saumuru Kante, le créateur du royaume Congo, et il a été développé par le célèbre Sundiata Keita en fait. Mais le créateur du royaume est Saumuru Kante.
Mali ou Congo?
Non, je parle du Mali, pardon. Manding, Mali.
D'accord. So the Malian Empire, which is the Manding, I'm also learning from Emily today. So the Mayan Empire was created by
Saumuru Kante.
Saumuru Kante, which was then led by Sundiata Keita.
Exactement. Et Sundiata Keita a développé l'empire du Mali, mais avec une philosophie, pour montrer que la philosophie existait déjà en Afrique, une vision politique existait déjà en Afrique. Parce que je peux citer aussi un Sundiata Keita qui dit voici le mandat sera fort si chacun prend son poste, chacun a un certain type de responsabilité dans la société. Et si avant, on avait déjà cette vision de la responsabilité dans la société, ça veut dire qu'il y avait une politique derrière les sociétés en fait.
Okay, so Sundiata Keita, who extended the Mayan Empire, he developed the Mayan Empire based on philosophy, which is to show that in the past we already had philosophers from Africa. And in his philosophy, it was that the empire has to be ruled with a political vision. Like everybody needs to know what he or she is doing. And when everybody will be doing he or she has to do, then the empire will grow further.
Ok, maintenant entrons plus précisément dans l'histoire même de l'Empire du Mali. L'Empire du Mali qui a été créé au environ du 8e siècle, entre le 8e siècle et son déclin qui va jusqu'au 15e siècle, est un empire qui a toujours été très célèbre. Il a été beaucoup appelé empire là où l'or pousse comme sur des arbres en fait. C'est un empire plein d'or, extrêmement plein d'or.
So the Mayan Empire was created in the 8th century and it fell by the 15th century. But during their reign, I would say so, they were known as the empire where gold was manufactured. Because in those days we were saying manufactured, but they discovered gold and they used the gold as the principal trade fair in that zone, and that's why it grew a lot because they were the only one or the main producers of gold at that time between the 8th and the 15th century.
Et là, je veux refaire à ce que mon collègue disait tout à l'heure quand il a parlé de Mansa Moussa. Mansa Moussa qui venait précisément de cet empire-là, qui était l'homme le plus riche parce que dans la Bible on parle de Salomon, lui on l'a pas vu, mais Mansa Moussa a des récits encore présents et encore existants de sa richesse énorme.
So in the Mayan Empire, as Matthew talked about Mansa Musa, so Mansa Musa historically and non-religiously, because in the Bible it said that King Solomon was the richest man in the world, but historically people say it was Mansa Musa, the richest man up to date. So no wealth has ever crossed that of Mansa Musa in those times, but it was due to the gold that was produced in Malian Empire.
Et à tel point, il était riche à tel point où il a fait chuter le prix de l'or en Égypte.
He was so rich that he made the price of gold to fall in Egypt.
Exactement. Donc, comment se développait exactement cet empire? Cet empire se développait sur 3 points, précisément le commerce d'or, de ressources comme l'ivoire. Parce que si on prend une carte de l'Afrique, le Mali se situe exactement entre l'actuel Mali, l'actuel Niger, la Guinée et toute cette zone-là, en fait. C'est là que se situe l'empire du Mali. Parce que quand on parle de l'empire du Mali, certaines personnes vont penser au Mali actuel, en fait.
Donc, continue, je vais résumer à la fin.
Certaines personnes pensent à l'actuel Mali et qui ne réfèrent vraiment pas géographiquement au Mali dont on parlait. Et la présence du Mali sur les frontières de l'Atlantique permettait un libre-échange entre le Sahara et l'Atlantique, donc permettait un libre-échange entre les populations arabes et le Mali, et aussi ceux du Sud. Donc le Mali était considéré comme une zone d'échange entre 2 populations et 2 cultures complètement différentes, pour montrer aussi qu'il y avait une certaine cohésion entre non seulement les Africains, mais d'autres cultures aussi.
Okay, so he tried to talk about the Malian Empire and the impact of the Malian Empire in the west part of Africa, because when we talk about Malian Empire, most people think it's about the country Mali, whereas the Malian Empire was in Mali, Senegal, Guinea, and also Ivory Coast. So where they extended themselves, they used the coast to sell their gold, and also they were trading ivory. So they used that coast to trade with the Arabs, to trade with the southern part of Africa, which made them the central part or the central economical location of Africa at that time.
Et ce sera sans vouloir choquer des gens, mais à ce moment-là, déjà, l'Europe n'était pas sur une voie de développement quand on parle du développement du Mali, à ce moment-là. Une façon de dire que ce n'est pas une chose qu'on apprend, le développement, c'est une chose qu'on avait déjà, mais maintenant, d'où vient le déclin exactement du Mali? C'est quand, après la réputation de Mansa Musa, qui est allé au-delà des frontières et qui est vraiment allé vers les pays arabes, il y a eu cette histoire-là de ce monsieur tellement riche en or qu'il réussissait à faire chuter l'or d'un pays complètement. Et c'est de là que vient réellement la chute de l'Empire. Parce que cette légende-là, allant dans les oreilles des Portugais, parce que ce sont les Portugais qui ont créé cette cause-là, allant dans les oreilles des Portugais, crée une envie, un désir de ok, comment ils font pour avoir ça? Il faut qu'on aille piller, en fait. Ça, c'est du vol. Il faut piller. On ne peut pas avoir ça, donc il faut qu'on aille piller, en fait, ce qu'ils ont.
So when we were talking about Malian Empire and Mansa Musa, as I said previously, Mansa Musa made the price of gold in Egypt to fall. So, and this information went all over the world. And the Portuguese, which heard about that, they tried to enter into Mali and try to acquire that gold. So they made a mission to make Mansa Musa fall, which caused the decline of the Malian Empire in the 15th century.
Exactement. Et maintenant, contrairement à certains d'autres royaumes, dont je ne vais pas parler parce que ce n'est pas ce dont on parle, mais la chute de l'Empire du Mali a été très brutale. Parce qu'elle s'est passée déjà sur une chute économique. Les Portugais se sont installés sur les côtes côtières et aussi sur au niveau du Sahara, empêchaient la transaction des ressources et de l'échange de l'ivoire et de toutes ces ressources qu'avait le Mali, entre le Mali et les autres États, en fait. Ce qui empêchait la commercialisation, en fait, des produits maliens. Ce qui prouve aussi que là, il y avait aussi un côté économique, que l'économie réussissait à relever un État. Ce qui relève les États actuellement, on l'avait déjà, en fait, une façon de dire qu'on n'apprend rien de nouveau, en fait.
So the decline of the Malian Empire, basically through the Portuguese, was that they installed themselves at the borders of the Malian Empire, making sure that no gold or no trade will happen within the Malian Empire and the other empires. So that made it such a way that the Malian Empire, on an economic base, they had to fall. And he's trying to relate it with the actual situations in Africa where when an economy is developing, there will be some other forces who try to install their bases at the borderlines in order to prevent trading of within the countries. And as we can see in with the Africa Free Trade Zone, some countries have not yet been into that zone, which is very difficult for economies to develop.
Exactement. Et maintenant, je voudrais parler sur l'aspect culturel. Pour conclure, en fait, sur l'aspect culturel, en fait. Parce que là, on a parlé des aspects économiques, politiques, mais le culturel a aussi beaucoup marqué l'Empire du Mali. Dans le sens où la venue des Portugais, ils sont venus avec leurs dieux, leurs croyances. Et maintenant, en dépit des autres croyances, étant donné que le Mali, l'Empire du Mali, était un centre d'échange entre les peuples et les autres, et l'Europe, on peut dire l'Occident aussi. Donc, il y a eu un certain break dans le sens où les populations qui venaient au Mali pour prendre certaines cultures du Mali ont aussi pris la culture de la religion qui était imposée aux Maliens.
Ils sont venus avec eux, ils ont pris.
Ils sont venus, les Portugais sont venus avec leur culture exactement et l'ont transmise.
So, during the decline of the Malian Empire, as the Portuguese were entering into Mali, they did not just come to take the gold, but they also came to impose their culture. Their culture, where when they started imposing the culture, they had to make in such a way that the Malians will forget their own cultures and forget about their own religious beliefs they had at that time. So that's basically the history of the Malian Empire from the 8th to the 15th century. So I will thank Emric for this how can I say, for this good presentation or for this truth about the Malian Empire. I'll go to Iman. Iman, you're focused on the northern part of Africa, and Emric just talked about Malian Empire, the trade they had with the northern part of Africa and all the rest. So what are your thoughts? How did this trade at that time shape North Africa, and how is it still shaping North Africa presently, and what is the diplomacy that North Africa is trying to develop in order to be an emerging part of Africa?
First of all, thank you, Patrick, for the invitation. Before delving into this, I think it's very important to acknowledge, because a lot of people forget or assume that North Africa is not Europe. It is part of Africa. And there are people who look like me who are also African. So sometimes even North Africans themselves, they forget that they are part of Africa. So I think it's very important to also be included in these spaces. So thank you again for the invitation. Well, it's hard to summarize everything in a few minutes, but it was also interesting what you said about Mali in Timbuktu, because it was a very important point of trade when tracing back the history. North Africa, because of its geographical location, which overlooks the Mediterranean, which is like a bridge to Europe, Sub-Saharan Africa, but also the Middle East, this cultural component or this geographical component made it a cultural melting point where there was a lot of dynasties who passed. There was a huge influence, specifically during the Islamic Golden Age. And that's why the North Africa has a strong regional identity that sets it apart a bit from the entire African continent, which is why a lot of people see it. And a lot of people also identify as Arabs, Amazigh, and rarely African, unfortunately. So I think, again, it's important to remind our interconnectivity with Sub-Saharan Africa. So, for example, talking about the 8th century, the beginning of the Islamic Golden Age, and how the Umayyad dynasty, which was the major dynasty that brought Islam and brought Arabization to the North Africa, and how this did set it apart from the rest of Africa, passing by the Almoravids and Almohads, who were two Berber or Amazigh. By the way, being careful with the word Berber is also important, because the actual naming of the indigenous people of North Africa, specifically Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia, is Amazigh, which translates into homme libre, like free men. And the word Berber itself, it can have a pejorative connotation because it was used by the Romans to refer to people who did not speak Latin. So I think it's important also to be careful when addressing these populations. Moving on, I think also when addressing the history of Africa in general, because we tend to dwell a lot on history, but we forget about the future or or the present or what's happening right now, because there is indeed a lot of efforts to make the continent prosper. So in terms of post-coloniality, we're talking about when most North African countries got their independence by the mid-900s, around 56, 60s, and after the end of the brutal French colonization and also Spanish for Morocco. There has been, the region faced a lot of challenges in terms of also foreign borders, foreign borders implication, which means the artificial borders that are currently separating the countries and that are still causing problems to this day. For example, when you look at the dispute or the artificial dispute between Morocco and Algeria, and which I think is one of the stupidest in the century. So it is important also to acknowledge how the colonialism experience has still shapes and still influences the power dynamics between the countries. But when we're looking at what's happening currently, and I see this trend or wave of pan-Africanism in North Africa, which is very positive in my opinion. I think we still haven't reached the level where this is being implemented on also an individual level. Like there are still people who still don't see themselves as part of Africa. I'm talking specifically about North Africa because I think it is important to acknowledge that it has also contributed to the continent and has a lot of is having shared futures with other countries. So it's important to address it as an integral part. When it comes to what's happening right now, for example, in the case of Morocco, it reintegrated the African Union, which after the absence of almost 30 years, which was a very positive step in terms of regional cooperation. They recently integrated in 2017, and there was in 2018 there was the African Continent Free Trade Agreement, which took place, I think, in Rwanda. It was the 28th edition of the African Union summit, yeah, and more than 54 countries actually signed this agreement, which facilitates investments and also the movements of goods. So I think there's a lot of, I think instead of focusing on what's happened in the past, it's also important to address, also I really liked what the professor said about the future is African, and Africa should be for Africans. And there's also one very important point that I think it's important to address is that, yes, of course, the ultimate dream is to go back to our countries, but when our countries are ready also to receive us. And I don't think that's gonna happen like this. Obviously, there should be work from our generation, and I see that this generation has a lot to bring and a lot to offer. And there is also this urge and this determination for a lot of second generation, first generation to come back